Well, everybody, are you ready for hell on earth next week? Because that is what is predicted to happen with Elon Musk set to begin unbanning everyone previously banned from the platform Twitter, as long as they haven't broken the law or egregiously spammed users. And this is going to be just a hellscape.
Yeah, he already released the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Uh, so with our new Lord and Savior Antichrist Elon Musk in charge, we'll see what happens next. I don't understand everyone's beef with Elon Musk. I'm gonna put that out there. I've been watching this guy for years. I watched Tesla when it first began before it was public, getting really excited about everyone complaining about how we don't have electric cars, and I'm like, well, wait until next year because I saw Tesla on the horizon. It was very exciting to see all that stuff come to be. Um, and I've seen this guy tweet over the years, and he's obviously hilarious. He's to me just a normal human being who started some pretty amazing companies. So I'm not entirely sure. I maybe I give him like a really long runway because he's accomplished so much. But I also don't understand how people could have beef with him and like not have beef with another billionaire like Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or Steve Jobs, who have done, in my mind, like seemingly more damage, obviously, than this guy who seems to be single-handedly trying to save the world.
Hey, what could possibly go wrong with giving the advice that everybody should be eating 3D printed meat and soy?
Yeah, and also talking about like shooting rockets up into the atmosphere and trying to block out the sun to stop the heating of the earth.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's correct. You heard me, people. There was an idea Bill Gates had put forth to essentially institute Snowpiercer.
So it's like nuclear winter almost.
Yeah, yeah. It's just you have a bunch of these guys who understand mechanics somewhat, then they think that this applies to people.
Leave the rockets to Elon Musk. I mean, some of those
Yeah,
did explode too, but he's also the first person to, despite some failures, also achieve success, like reusable rockets that land themselves.
it's amazing how he seems to commandeer these systems. He's able to get people together. And I understand the criticism too. Like there are some people that think he's some sort of like modern day plantation owner, and it makes zero sense to me how it's like, okay, like building the future might require difficult work, and everyone's like, oh, just screaming into the abyss because they can't fathom the possibility that they would have to work overtime in order to build the future. It's just
The
obscene to
year
me.
is It's the year 2020 on this technological hacienda.
Musk comes in, he's like, siesta's over, bitches.
Get back to your keyboard.
Type monkeys, type.
I don't hear any clacking.
You are going to send me a report of how much you clacked this goddamn week by the end of Friday. Yeah, I think I want to title this episode Elon Musk lawful neutral or chaotic neutral. And I feel like he swings between both pendulums because I've never seen this guy, he doesn't create these types of I don't know, like the laws that he does end up seemingly break slightly involve more or less like investment rules and regulations, the securities sorts of issues that he creates with tweets occasionally. But for the most part, it seems like he knows how to navigate those systems pretty well. He's able to take government, like, I think what shows a type of maturity inside the industrial world is being able to purposely and successfully integrate public money into a private company like SpaceX. This is one where you're able to take some money from the government and purposefully use it to build something that, later on NASA and the like can use. Although it's actually pretty funny how easily they seemingly crushed NASA to the reusable rocket race.
Couple years, small team. beats government every time.
To Elon Musk like single-handedly is a case for decentralization.
Yeah, just some sort of strange streamlined surface.
So when I heard that he was taking over Twitter, I was very excited because I feel like whatever happens, I think he provides an honest sort of experimentation to whatever's happening on the platform. So like I give him, like I said, a long runway because like I know it's going to be messy in the short run. It always is, but you know what? He's the guy who takes it upon himself to do those risks, and he takes responsibility for what happens. And he tries to figure out at the end, what was good, what was bad, and yeah, not every decision is going to be good, but he's also human. It's like I don't understand why people don't see that side to him as much. He's not like God incarnate.
Yeah, he's willing to work towards the goals that he wants. Like Tesla almost went bankrupt and failed. And now with Twitter, with a lot of people saying that he overpaid for the company, and because of advertisers pulling out and the war that is being raged against him, because people say, if you aren't playing kickball my way, I'm going to try to take the ball and go home. And so I believe his net worth just this year has been a loss of over $100 billion. And now he's trying to save Twitter by also transforming it into something that he thinks would be beneficial for the globe. They lost
Mhm.
5,000 employees so far. They were losing 4 million a day. I don't know exactly where that number is. Like they had been losing that, or as soon as he took over, they began losing that. It's unclear, but they have to overcome. I'm assuming that it has been like that. They were hemorrhaging money because that's one of the reasons he cites for laying people off. And also a lot of people that they chose to leave and take a 3 month severance package, 3 months pay, and they could leave because he sent out some emails that said, we're going to work really hard and here are our goals. And if you don't like them, you can take this. If you don't want to work really hard and work towards this company's new mission, vision, value, then see you later. You should leave. So people made that conscious decision. I don't know how many of the 5,000 fit that category. But yeah, it's just very, very heated. I did look up the one detail. It was CBS that had paused their Twitter account because they wanted to make sure that it was safe. They were very concerned after the orange man came back. And by that, I just mean Elon reinstated the account, but no tweets have been made from that account. And it's been like, I don't know, almost a week now, if not a week. But that enough is to repel certain organizations and ideas and people away as far as possible.
Send the midwits shrieking.
And now they're back on
Yeah.
Twitter because they just can't stay away. There was a person on Timcast who said, "Lord, make me chaste, just not yet." I'm gonna be leaving Twitter pretty soon. I just have to tweet a little bit more. He
Yeah, I think
just
that's a famous quote from a philosopher. Um,
the Lord make me chaste, just not yet.
yeah, yeah.
That's funny.
But so what's going on with Twitter too? I think we're going to see some wild sorts of changes to it. Not at first too. I also think he's done it really well so far, where he's really trying to evaluate just where are the problems truly at, and going from there. And I think he's done pretty well in like making sure that it stays live and it's constantly working, and it's not like I've never had any problems. Like unlike Coinbase, like you can go in Coinbase any other day and it's like just not fucking working. And they're like, I'm not sure if this is your account or not. And it's like, okay, well, I haven't changed anything on my side. My IP address is actually still the same. And my cookies seem to be working like they should. So I don't know why Coinbase has such a problem knowing where my money is. And then yet, on a Twitter newsfeed, all my memes seem to be in place. So it's It's a very strange world that we live in.
I don't often open up my Coinbase wallet on my phone, but whenever I do, it always said, your security settings have changed. You have to reset your account. And then I have to find my seed phrase and literally obtain access to my account because my password is not good enough anymore. And so just for some reason, it decides that it loses access to my account. I don't know if it's my phone, but the commonality there is Coinbase.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So it's just like a quick, rundown comparison between the two of how even taking over and making, I don't know, people blow it up to be seemingly drastic changes, but I haven't seen anything on the ground. Like it still visually presents itself and functions the same. And there was talk about all the different ways to monetize it, which I think is like this is the right thing to do. Is he owns the company now? It's people need to get over that fact. I've also been real disappointed, I would say, in like people that I looked up to in a younger age to see them just melt down over this Musk thing. It's like worse than the Trump derangement syndrome. Like I couldn't really understand in 2016 why people hated Trump as much as they did. I kind of had an idea. It's like, okay, he's this rich guy. He has a big attitude. He was on The Apprentice, but they seem to like. I remember people loving him in The Apprentice. So it's like maybe it's because I'm not really cued into the upper echelons of cultural society that I
I
can't
love
really be
us.
privy to this sort of information. But
I respect a good, strong boss, except when he's my boss.
yeah, absolutely. And it's like, okay, like, well, he's the president. He's not like dictator of America. I like, did you forget what this position was? Like, yeah, he's commander in chief, and guess what? He didn't actually nuke anyone.
I think it's that people are visual sadists. So they like other people. They like watching other people get pushed around. But when it comes to themselves, they're just a bunch of pussies.
I think the other thing about celebrities too is that, and this is like just something that you learn as you advance in age, is like, yeah, they are just people, but they're people who in today's day and age are really good at just writing out news stories. So this is how I think they maintain their sort of celebrity status is kind of falling in line with each other, not really deviating too much from each other. A few of the key members that can act contrarian and have success doing so will, but I think for the majority of them, it's like they all have to, jump on the same train, and so everyone is along for the ride. All the boats rise with this tide, and to me, it was just disappointing to see because I thought these were people that I respected, and I just saw like them talking about taking shits in the passenger seat of their Tesla before like turning it back into the dealership or something like that. I'm like, what kind of fucking childish behavior is this? It just
Wow.
completely irritated me, and this is like from 60-year-old men that had like
Wow.
long established careers and I don't know. I don't even want to say the benefit of humankind now that I see what kind of animals they actually are.
That's
But
incredible. There's some sort of weird uh, adjuvant characteristic that is now permeating in society where the social aspect or perceived social aspect of something just has a huge influence over people. It's a weird affinity where now everybody has to have a very strong opinion, a very uniform opinion about things. You're not allowed to be a fence sitter anymore in general. It's just a very noisy world with a lot of crying people. I mean, at the end of the day, it's people on like online. It's the same thing with a video that you don't like. Nobody made you watch that video. People were like actively seeking it out. It's a very strange phenomenon. When social media first came out, people would like hate other people but they couldn't get off their profile. It's like you're just scrolling through their profile and reading every single word that they type, looking at every picture they post. It's like people want to be upset or something. Maybe it's because they
yeah,
don't have to actually raise animals or grow plants or hunt or build a shelter. Maybe
I
just
think it's
life is
yeah,
easy. Your
that makes
Maslow's
sense.
hierarchy of needs, like everything's been taken care of. So what else is there to do? I mean, if you look at any other animal and how it has to survive, and then you look at humans and we're just like fat, lazy, angry, with a box of metal in front of us that has a screen, and we can just move our thumbs up and down and swipe and like spew venom. So really crazy transformation that's happened over the past 30 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because like, you end up being at a job where you're forced to be unhealthy for like 8 to 10 hours a day, staring at a screen when you could be outside. You just watch as seasons pass from your window, essentially, waiting for death
I
to
remember
come.
what it was like. I remember the soft caress of a leaf as it fell and touched my cheek.
I've always hated it.
How I always hated it. Everybody's just a Grinch.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like we instead of
Watch.
trying to figure out what our Grinchness is caused from, we're just leaning into it. I think that's it, though. Like you mentioned specifically on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I feel like that's very true, and I would add to that the path to celebrityship is also very, I would say, like a well-trodden path at this point in time, because you just have to do something that's ridiculous that no other normal human being would attempt to do, and as long as you can make a giant fool of yourself consistently, then you'll have some sort of fame. Maybe be more akin to infamy, but at least people will have name recognition, and at least that's all you can really ask for in today's day and age if you're not spectacular in any way. Maybe you can be infamous, and maybe you can derive some sort of economic benefit from this situation.
Hmm. Yeah, maybe just people haven't figured out exactly their own niche and how everybody can have an impact, because as we usually talk about on the show, or somehow I pivot and redirect into this, like the human brain is the most magnificent organic creation of the universe. To have a computer that has volition and sentience is nothing short of a miracle. So there's no reason that we have to follow any predefined path. We're literally capable of anything: going into space, creating antibiotics, harnessing electricity. So it's weird when we have to go online and find like the one size fits most ideology and then just espouse that. Like, why be an echo chamber when you can synthesize original ideas? It's just a really strange gravity that we're experiencing.
Yeah, and they
It's
don't
like,
even have to be like not to be too contrarian or anything like that, but I'm just reminded of the first philosophy book I ever read was the Poetics. And in the first lines of the Poetics, Aristotle says that man is a mimic of all things. And that's one of the like lines that I thought was most mind-blowing at a very impressionable young age of being like
mm,
everything that we create is something that we find in nature, and then we synthesize together into something new. So like original ideas don't have to be something that's just like you're not creating, some sort of made up, I don't know, a flume bar or something like that, some sort of like made up thing that you can't even conceptualize what it is because it's a nonsensical word. But you
hey,
have this
Shakespeare
sort
made up
of,
plenty of words.
yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, like making up words is actually part of the creative process as well. It's like you can't. It's like we think in words and we think in concepts, and I feel like without
Oh,
those words and concepts, that it would be difficult to think about things without having some sort of, um, playing some other game. Like I constantly think about how a lot of like Norwegian, Germanic, and Anglo sort of words and locations are just like combinations of words,
you're a
Watergale
very,
and Rockbridge and stuff like that. And it's just like that's how things have just smashed together over time. We just synthesize these things together and they create beautiful new concepts.
yes, those compound words are great examples of the whole Sapir-Whorf hypothesis and theory, which is just language influencing culture, culture influencing language, environment affecting them. Like if a culture that has not traveled for an extraordinarily long time, let's say, and then they're in a very hot climate that's consistent, they won't have a snow god if there's no experience of snow. It's very unlikely that they would conceptualize snow independent of it actually existing and then also create a god based on that. So you have all these environmental factors that are affecting it, like the Hawaiians had Pele, who was like a god with volcanic attributes because they live on volcanic islands. So their environment is influencing it.
Yeah, and you could even say that this is how, some archaeologists and anthropologists have guessed that if you do have a god that seems to have a different attribute than what your normal environment is, it may be an indicator that that god was adopted from somewhere else, some contact with another tribe who did have those sorts of locations. So, any one of those combinations could be a valid precursor to a hypothesis that could later then be explored. So, absolutely. And I kind of feel like social media has to be that way. It has to be some sort of grand experiment that we're working with. I feel like we have, as a species, become really like amazingly adapt to creating technology. I just don't think that we've really figured out where our place is within culture and technology. That sort of conversation is still going on.
Maybe we almost should give more credit to the average person who is on social media. I mean, they're just exposed to so much information versus somebody 50 years ago. Uh, we're all just overwhelmed. We're in the exponential age of information. It's not only being created at these insane rates, but we're also being flooded with it from every angle, and we're expected to arrive at the correct opinion. And we're just on an individual level, we're all just one person,
Yeah,
and
it
we're
really
just
does feel
surrounded
like,
by every other idea.
yeah, we're getting like just fizzled out from all the information overload where, our brains were, I think, they developed, I wouldn't say necessarily invented. Like, I feel like that sort of, you know, begs the question, but our brains developed for these smaller, probably like tribal and, yeah, I would even say like in some ways civilization level communities, sure. We're still developing in that way, but you know, I feel like the internet just opened up the entire world to us all at once, and we're just drowning in this flood of information. It's almost like the Luddites have built their own arcs, and they're able to navigate away from these floods. But
Arcs
like the
of
worst,
Luddites,
yeah, yeah. But the
all
Luddites
these
have to
ships going
still
different directions.
they have to deal with their own inbreeding problems. So it's like nothing is perfect in this world. So in some ways, the people who are going to learn how to swim, I fear, are actually the kind of people that we don't want in society, which is the people who can dissociate things very easily. There's got to be some sort of consequence to this that we're not really picking up on, but I think we're actually seeing the first indications of. And ironically, the Marxists, I feel like, have been really poor at even articulating their own point, which could actually be very strong here, which is like the alienation of the individual in the context of how society has essentially gone online. So we don't even seem to have this sort of navigational mechanism or even the basis of the conversation to involve how do we either adapt to this new way of being or do we go back and try to reject it? Because I feel like those are the only two options. It's either we are going to live online and then our communities are completely virtual, or we're going to have more of a rejection of social media because you can only really have as much attention in one or the other. Like that's the mutual exclusivity. Like sure, you could say that most things will be a mixed state where you have some involvement in your community and some involvement online, but to really get the most out of either, like you just be stuck in some sort of like uncanny situation, which will probably be for the majority of people anyway. But the question is, I wonder what those majority of people are going to do over time. Are they just going to stay there? Are they going to try to move in one direction or the other? It feels like going the way of least amount of friction is going to be virtual. and that doesn't feel right to me. I don't know.
I'm imagining a cup of water and then different drops of food dye being added, and slowly they'll just start mixing. And so I'm specifically also thinking about language barriers. And so right now we're seeing basically everybody that speaks English. That's where all these wars are happening. Like nobody's arguing in Japanese, and if they didn't know English as well, like assuming people only know one language and only type in one language. So all these battles between ideas can only happen because there is a mutually intelligible language between them. So as our society globally becomes more virtual, it seems like the next step would be like active translations occurring on websites and social media, where now the arguments or the discussions, the debates, whether hostile or peaceful, would occur across even more cultures now that there's like, I mean, like the language diversity in Africa, I think, is the richest in the globe. I believe that they have the most linguistic diversity and number of languages. So all of those ideas would begin to be able to compete with like active translating to other languages and active translating into theirs when other people are responding. And that would be an interesting it's not like homogeneity, but the medium of communication would be, if they can be accurately interpreted and then translated into the other communicator's language. And then that would just be even more ideas conglomerating together, coalescing, morphing, attacking, defending, agreeing. So that could be pretty interesting, even with a physical separation among country lines or continental lines or across oceans.
Yeah, yeah, it is
With the
pretty
advent of,
interesting too.
with Starlink especially, which is providing or potentially providing internet to every single spot on the planet, on the surface of the planet at least.
Yeah, Starlink is actually very meaningful in that way too. That I think, in thinking about it more broadly, I think you're absolutely right. But I've also always thought it was interesting that like electricity and internet connection is still like pretty local, relatively. You know what I mean? Like the just like the physical mechanics of it are still like that. Whereas like Starlink is actually like, oh, this thing is orbiting the planet. It really is actively traveling around the area. It isn't just like built into your local utility sort of grid format or something like that. So the with the further decentralization, it will be interesting that you'll have like the still like the same cultural concept of a hero, which is someone who brings something for the benefit of the local tribe. In a different context, you'll have people who are like, I hail from our cooking, and now I'm back on, our I don't know, D&D.
Born
So
from
now,
4chan.
well, 4chan I don't think has anything productive on it whatsoever. That's why I didn't use it. But yeah, no, that was just a jab at them. But yeah, it's I think that concept will still sort of apply. I kind of feel like it's man, I don't know how to put this. Well, I don't think it's a dominant strategy. So I think it is a losing strategy to go down that path. That's why I'm worrying about the whole virtualization addiction, because it's easy to do. And I think it'll be uh, just a glaring weakness that people aren't really preparing for. So, and what I mean by that is, in all sorts of ways. Like, one, you'll have probably increased healthcare because people are going to be not as active, supposedly. Um, the other thing is that, you'll have families breaking up, and I think the family economic unit is incredibly important for building wealth. So I think you'll have people who are staying more or less, not even at the proletariat state. I don't even know what to call them at this point in time, but I feel like the term proletariat almost doesn't even apply anymore. I understand that it's supposed to like mean originally as factory worker, and I guess you could apply that to the sort of like service mill that we have in today's economy. But So like yeah, in some ways you'll have a digital proletariat um, without any hope of escaping because why would they?
And I think the further you get away from the family unit, the higher the chances are that at some point government assistance will be required to bridge the gap. And that means requires money from other people forcefully.
Yes, yeah, and that of course is going to lead to its own gigantic totalitarian can of worms.
It
um,
sure does.
you're absolutely right though, and I think, and it's funny because like the guy who's also most vocal about this is Elon Musk. You know, having all of his kids and stuff like that, and I think that's a wonderful thing for people to see that he's incredibly industrious and he has a family. And I think that's everything that people should be like striving for. You don't have to have this obsession with working or with making the future realized per se. You can get there at your own pace. Everyone has a different level of that, but I think we should be like why is our greatest aspiration to be middle fucking management and then live online with our, you know, queer whatever fetishistic likes and I don't know. It's just it seems so depressing when you see what's happening and you feel like I just don't want to be a part of this whatsoever.
It's more crazy than the Wild West. And I imagine just somebody who is not uh, trained in the ways of wilderness survival, and then you just send them into the wilderness with like a pocket knife. Like, good luck. But it's like that landscape with ideas and ideologies. Like people are going like this is why we have very misguided young people a few years ago who ended up joining ISIS. It's
Yeah.
like and you had like the people, I'm gonna travel across the Middle East and show that it's the summer of love, and they get kidnapped and executed, and you're like, wow, no one could have saw that coming. Or I think like there was some person that tried to travel across one of those countries to show that their mean old dad was just uh, uh, a bigot, to use the inappropriate term. And then like some taxi cab driver tried to rape her, which is terrible. And then when she recovered, she tried to do it again because she thought it was a fluke. And then the same thing happened. And it's like
Wow.
you there are a lot of things that can be said about that. But you know, it's like when you see LGBTQIA plus people who were protesting against Islamophobia, and in those very same countries, they execute you and hang you from a crane for what you do in bed. And it's like, I don't know if that's ironic or, but there's some weird, like diametrically opposed, like that would be like the US government saying something about supporting terrorist groups. I don't know. It was just very strange. Very strange. I can't even explain it. I fail. I lack the capacity to describe that
That's
accurately.
right. I followed you up to a point and then you lost me, but it's all right. Getting back to the situation on Twitter, I think it's also interesting that people think that like Elon Musk did this on a fluke, which I don't understand either because there's clearly talks, conversations, podcasts, all sorts of stuff going back to I think even like 2015, 2016 when Elon was talking about how Twitter would be a great format to come like to communicate between Earth and Mars because you're limited to a certain number of characters, you know, but it's still like a very active site for people to spread news to each other. So for having the first like interplanetary social media network, Twitter is like a great consideration where Facebook, YouTube, and others wouldn't necessarily succeed, even Instagram, because at least the tweets themselves would be able to carry uh, information readily available and easily.
Sticks and stones may hurt, or may break my bones, but words are lethal and should be banned.
I heard that possible ways of monetizing Twitter would include obviously the $8 badge that I think was recently gotten rid of, but the all the memes that came from that were absolutely hilarious. Like to me, it makes a good amount of sense because you do want to cut down on the number of bots. Does it guarantee that there's no bots? No. Does it guarantee that no one plays any shenanigans? Absolutely not. You kind of need to have this combination, it seems like, where you have recognition from the community because you're kind of like the community of people are also sort of checking, they are a checker in a way of who this person's identity is and if this person is really the person they say they are. Uh, because we find that out pretty easily. I think there's some interesting internet journalism, which not all of it has been effective, but some of it has certainly been effective in the ways that you can find people pretty easily, scarily so, from the internet nowadays. So you can find out where they live, what their businesses are, all sorts of stuff, which, I mean, obviously, something like doxing has to be a part of the conversation too when we're talking about building a social media network that doesn't exclude people unnecessarily. I
I
can't
remember
tell if it's.
looking,
Oh, go ahead.
I just remember looking at Google Maps and seeing a satellite image of the house that I grew up in with more detail because it was the first time I had ever seen it than I would have liked. I was like, oh my gosh, this is like an aerial shot of my property. This is frightening. And
Is
now
it
it's like
a?
normal, but it's so strange to that even exists.
They have to make sure that the target's correct for those tungsten rods of God to be dropped from the satellite. But yeah, so advertisers have to play a role. I think direct payment is a good idea too, because I have always thought that to be the most honest form of showing value, obviously. Like it's really weird that like YouTube, everyone wants free, but they're also really okay with paying for Netflix. And there seems to
Hmm.
be like, well, why is that? And it's like, oh, okay, well, they recognize that there's higher production value that goes into Netflix, and therefore you should be able to pay for it because you're getting more of a professional level quality of video, whereas YouTube, more or less, you're looking for people who are more or less like you. Although 100% you would search for the people who are putting in the most value that you can get out of a free video. So you're not even watching the really shitty videos made by people. You're watching the ones who put in almost professional level quality on the YouTube video, because
Hmm.
they're the best value for the buck. So like everything is sort of like mediating towards these points, and then you see like how Netflix's stock isn't quite as good as it used to be, and how the quality of free videos is really increasing. That you're getting this whole democratization of video streaming as a concept. And I've heard that this is actually a direction that Twitter, maybe not itself, but I think as a way of pairing up Twitter with a new type of platform that I heard might be a thing where Musk might create a type of YouTube competitor. And that I would be very excited for because I think that would be a great way to kind of start fresh as a social network, have a great way to integrate what's happening on Twitter with this new sort of video platform. And on top of that, get more advertisers involved.
It's definitely a huge money issue that he seems to have walked into. And if there's anybody that's going to be a part of that solution, it probably would be the co-creator of PayPal. And I have faith in him. There's definitely people are picking sides on whether they want to support or be against. Maybe they have a reason, maybe they don't. Maybe they have their own desires and interests placed in front of them, which is understandable, but also it's kind of like I imagine people that are driving on the freeway. So if you're driving on the freeway or the highway and you're in the far right lane, and then there's an entrance and people are merging in, but there's no shoulder, there's a concrete barrier, and there's a lot of traffic, and people are moving very quick. like, yes, it's the person who is merging, it's their responsibility to zipper in, but also if they're about to hit that concrete Jersey barrier, some concessions and accommodations can be made. And where I'm going with this is Apple and Google are, there has been whispers in the woods of them considering deplatforming Twitter off of their stores because Twitter wants to create these alternative ways to pay. And,
Mhm.
and a lot of other apps have experienced that. There's a lot of back and forth. Elon would say the up to 30% fees going towards Apple Store is too high in his opinion. And actually, that would be 10 times what a credit card usually charges, which is, people don't like credit cards in the sense that every time you swipe your Visa, MasterCard, Discover at my store, I have to pay that credit card company 3% of that. So if you pay in cash, I get the whole amount. And then if you pay with credit card, I get 3% less. Now that opens up a lot more viable customers. If you don't have cash on you, then I would rather have a customer than not have a customer. But all else being equal, I would rather somebody pay with cash because I'm not losing 3% each time. So I can only imagine if you're losing 30% each time that somebody wants to sign up or buy whatever your product is because they have to use this middleman service through that store. And by him trying to go around that, then they're saying, oh, that's going to breach our terms of service. So we can potentially cut the cord and block one of the entrances into your store entirely.
Right, right. And I think that's actually like that works out for Apple because it is a monopoly. So it isn't quite the same from other products, obviously, because there isn't an alternative to the Apple audience. It's like just because you're like pretty much buying a section of the market that you need to kind of go into. So at the time, it probably was to Twitter's benefit to take a really terrible deal like that because it was the only game in town. Like there isn't anything quite like the exclusivity that Apple has brought to their customers that their customers routinely pay for.
Once you adhere that Apple sticker to your rear windshield, your fate is sealed.
And I know a lot of people enjoy that and they enjoy the service that they received. And I heard that on average, it's very good. Even though I'm like a Microsoft Android user, um, not all ventures tried by these giant companies have succeeded. I mean, obviously, Microsoft has had their fair share with not being able to get into the mobile game quite as easily, and that's their cross to carry. Google is another interesting one because they do have so much going for them that I feel like if anyone can compete with them, it is Musk because obviously you showed legacy car makers that yeah, I can make gigafactories. So I do trust his ability to scale. And it would be interesting to bring another competitor onto the market scene that isn't, quite so duopoly based between Apple and Google. Whereas, Apple and Google have a lot to benefit from excluding a third party. So if they catch any whiff of it, I think it's probably, they are just taking those measures that they can in order to keep their position. So it's
Yeah,
one of those like you can understand that they're doing it that way, and yet at the same time, it's like you're almost wondering. It's like, man, how is Twitter going to survive if this is like revealed too early in the process?
I'm not sure what the name of the concept is, but it reminds me of like predator dispersal. So there can only ever be so many predators within an environment, but as long as there's like one or two bears and they all get to eat, then everyone else is fine too. So there are like areas where hyenas and lions have their territories, and they can sort of leave each other alone. Yes, they bump heads and attack each other sometimes, but as long as you stay over there, you can eat that food. I stay over here, I can eat this food, and we're good. But now there's this third group. Okay, well, the enemy of there's this extra person we have to gang up on in order to make it more advantageous for us. So we don't have to be the only player in town. We just have to make sure that there's sufficient resources for us to work through. So I'm thinking about like Apple, Google, Tesla, and also Tesla is coming out with their Pi phone,
Yeah.
and so that's supposed to be another competitor in the same way that the American car companies were have really done everything they could to stop Tesla and have failed. Like they're not allowed to have dealerships. Uh, they weren't allowed to have all sorts of these like normal basic business functions, and that would be surprising to many people as they go down that rabbit hole and realize that Tesla is possibly more American made than any other American car company. If your
Mhm.
parts are from Mexico, assembled in Canada, sourced from Africa, but it's got the blue oval on it, or oh, it's got the golden bow tie. It's a Chevrolet,
Yeah,
and it ends up just
absolutely.
being like this multinational company at the end of the day. And there's just percentages of the pie chart for how American is it? Is it really? What does it mean to be built in the USA? Is this something like on a product that says made with natural ingredients, meaning you can have two natural ingredients and the other 98 are artificial, but it is a true statement. It's made with natural ingredients. It's mostly made with artificial ingredients, but the label stands true. It's intentionally misleading or disguised in order to create a certain effect, like how
No,
meats
yeah.
having the origin country removed because it might influence people's decisions. And we can't have people having information and making decisions for themselves because that would be dangerous. That would be against democracy.
Well, I feel like we're seeing a trend that's kind of going in these two directions. And funny enough, this is the book that I'm working on right now. So maybe I'm just more apt to see things that way. And so I'm including this bias anyway. But like this sort of combination of we want things centrally taken care of and also decentralized. And I feel like Android has sort of represented the decentralization, whereas Apple has sort of represented the centralization, the sort of like exclusive, you're paying for Apple as a service. So we are seeing software as a service, as it probably should be. I don't think that like you could buy software once and that makes sense for how many updates that you get from it. Like that as a business model hasn't made any sense to me, even though that was like the beginning of it. But there's a reason why people have gone away from that service. It's because the subscription model is so much more of a reliable way for companies to grow. And it's like you're getting this constant value trade. And so like you have more of a sustainable long-term path ahead of you. However, that also comes with the problem of things being more or less on this like treadmill that you can't escape from. So I kind of see like the centralization problem coming with the cost of you're on this constant treadmill. It's like, yeah, you can have a really good service, but the cost is going to be pretty consistent and regular. So you're going to have to own other systems in order to essentially like, mitigate that effect. Whereas decentralization, I think, kind of represents where this digital proletariat idea is sort of like coming from, where you have people who are more or less sharing with each other free tools that they've developed as software testers, engineers, all that sort of stuff, just practicing things around. So they're not absolutely perfect products, but like the fact that you can go and get like a competitor to Photoshop for free online, the fact that you can go get, a word competitor for free online as a word processing unit program. It's like a really interesting sort of combination of things that we've seen. So I feel like I don't know where Tesla fits in that, and I think that's why I'm kind of worried about them. Whereas like the duopoly actually has kind of set two. They have found the two dominant strategies that are occurring in our classist society.
Sell
and
expensive cars with expensive subscriptions.
Yeah, yeah, well, which Tesla is doing, and yet it seems like their software stuff is more like, remember back in the day when they were like giving away there was like no patents on anything Tesla related for a while. So
Yeah, it
it's
seemed like
also
they
weird that
really
Tesla is just
backpedaled on
somehow
that.
in between. Yeah, they're just like in a weird in between position that I don't know where the Pi phone fits. Like, is it just going to be another Android phone?
This is a really great question, and I think that cell phones themselves are just have entered a really noisy environment as well. There's so many of them. Are they really that different? Is the new iPhone really that much better than the previous model? It's like in some cases, like the ones that lost a headphone jack and everything else is the same. Sometimes others would consider it's a downgrade.
Yeah, ultimately, what you're looking at is that you have these two paradigms. You have the cheap route and you have the expensive route. So if you're going to compete with Apple, you have to have the same quality and compete on price. And with the Google route, the decentralization route, you have to compete on it being free and then offer higher quality.
I would
So
imagine
it's
a Python probably fits in there on a timeline that is far in excess of what should be uh, or of what is told to us, because they call it Elon time, where he's usually able to deliver on his promises, but the timeline is almost always incorrect. They'll say like, "Oh, by if I say by next month this will happen," what I mean is by 1 month plus 2 years. It's just like to make a phone. I think that and this is quite the statement. So I understand it's a crazy statement, but kind of like underestimating how much it actually takes to finish a product. And I know that he's the CEO of two companies and is doing that, but even in that position, still timelines are incorrect and always skewing to one side, delayed, not faster than expected. Not like, oh, I thought it was only going to take a year. It actually took 3 months. Like that's never the way that it goes.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So it's definitely a challenge that he'll have to work on, which I can understand like people's especially if you're an investor in something like this early on. It's like you don't want to be I understand like where the frustration would come from, obviously. And if if Elon really is doing something wrong, that is something that has to be called out. I'm not just trying to say that he has a blanket sort of, he can do whatever he wants. I'm saying that I give him personally, like I said, a long runway because I think he's actually done quite some good. So like you trust him to sort of like figure it out. The only other thing is that if he is actually doing something illegal, this probably has to be very much looked into. So I'm not saying that he gets a pass. He doesn't get the license to kill.
That's
um,
fair. And I remember when the Tesla Roadster was announced, which the second version of their Roadster. So it's the fastest production car on the planet. It's the one that's if you get the SpaceX package, it's gonna have 10 cold gas thrusters and hover a meter off the ground. And it's like the 0 to 60 was 1 second or something crazy. And you could reserve one of the founders editions for $250,000, and that amount was necessary to pay in full to preserve your situation. And I think like the first down payment was like $50,000, and then you have a certain amount of time to pay the rest. But so you're paying $250,000, and then they just hold on to that money, and you don't have a car because the car is not even finished being designed, but you're guaranteed a spot when they do make them. And this was like 3 years ago. So imagine giving somebody like $250,000 for a car, and then 3 or 4 years later, you still don't have a car. And you could have done a lot with that money. You could have invested it, even just sitting in some sort of so-called high yield savings account for interest.
you could have
You
built a
can,
full like company in 3 years using that money.
yeah, could have bought a house, let it appreciate up until the top of this housing boom, and then flip it. You could easily have. I would say it's not a stretch to say that you could have doubled that money or turned it into some sort of recurring passive income stream, or you could just let Tesla hold on to it. Now they would refund it if you wanted to, but it is almost humorous that you could have given them this money and gone this many years, with no end in sight. I mean, as we have seen, the future is unpredictable. 2 years ago, we could never have guessed what would happen 2 years from then, whether it's once in 100-year health event or government's ideas on what medical autonomy is, change, potential global battles and wars, which countries are involved. Most things are kind of unpredictable to the normal person that just tries to make it through life. So that's just very interesting. Who knows when that car will even come out?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, same thing could be said with the truck too, the Cybertruck. I mean, obviously, we
Oh
also have
yeah,
to like figure out that and consider that the whole pandemic situation didn't help things, and obviously that has stymied a lot of plans for a lot of different projects as well. So, but like in general, I think you are correct where there is like this sort of forever timeline that
the
does come
forever
with
timeline.
the Musk products that even though he will deliver, it's just a matter of someday. But that's actually the nice thing that you can trust it, even though the timeline is a bit longer, but it is one of those things that like I don't want to say he's holding him back per se, but like I'm sure that people of that sort of investor class might find it frustrating at times.
And that might also actually just be the way that it has to be. It's like when you're going to pick somebody up and you're running late, and then they're like, "How far out are you?" And you're like, "Oh, I'm only 3 minutes out," but you think you're actually 5 minutes out, but then you also hit extra red lights, or everybody seems to be driving on the road that you need to be on. People across the street or pulling over in front of you, and now you're 7, 9 minutes late. And it almost seems like maybe some business deals, if you actually gave them an accurate timeline, maybe they wouldn't have said yes. So you almost have to pull the photographer sequence, which is like grandma's taking the photos and grandma just wants one more photo, but that one more photo is actually about five more photos. But if they tell you, oh, just one more photo, then they, as long as they string you along individually, then you can get the result you want. But if somebody was like, let's say your significant other's like, let's go take 4,000 photos here, you would say no. But if they tell you that they only want a few, and a few turns out into 79, somehow they got what they wanted, essentially by telling you a little white lie. So maybe that's the situation. Elon, he's playing 4D chess. He knows I have to lie about the timeline. Like he like hates himself for it, but he knows it must be done.
Absolutely. It's like he knows that his audience will only last 3 hours, but it takes 5 hours to make the stew. So it's I mean he's just like in this situation where yeah, like maybe he
It's
does have to
almost
play the
done.
4D. Yeah,
It's
so
like
he's
still
like
in the freezer.
he wants to be lawful good, but or he wants to be lawful neutral, only ends up being chaotically good.
So that's somebody who does have a very a good thorough understanding of how the universe works, as opposed to someone who's going to ride their bicycle across the most dangerous roads in Afghanistan to show that the world is filled with love.
Yeah, and I mean on top of that too, like sometimes fuck these self-indulgent people that are demanding things on timeline. Like those are the bourgeois assholes that no one really wants to deal with anyway. It's like, oh, I'm really glad that you have this middle, management sensibility about you that pisses everyone the fuck off and would just make everyone hate their job even more. But
It's
I'm
very true,
glad
and it's
they get to complain on, it's like those assholes that get to complain about food on Twitter when they're not starving.
hmm. I imagine a component of this delay timeline could also be the same thing we just talked about with the our inability to predict the future is because it's unpredictable inherently. If we knew what it would be like, we could already start working, or we would be much further progressed on those ideas. But the future is novel and surprising because of a lot of these, like the goldfish jumps out of the tank, but lands in another tank. There's this leap and this jump, and the bridge was not able to be accurately envisioned until you arrived at the bridge. We don't know what the bridge looks like until you're there. So he's encountering, and his company and his design team and his engineers and his mathematicians and everybody else, they're encountering new errors or new problems that they have to overcome. And you don't know that they're problems until you encounter them, like people going into space or people designing brushless AC motors and electronics. You just really don't know what you're going to get into until you get into the weeds and try to sort everything out. So that could also be what's going on with some timelines. And in any case, I'm really glad that he's the main person leading the charge to try to change this social media landscape by purchasing one of the largest companies who's a player in that space, and then doing what he thinks will create the most lasting change and, in his mind, create the most freedom for all users, and with some limitations as he's described.
Mm-hmm.
But he says it's necessary for democracy, like actual democracy, not mob rule, not some sort of tyrannical suppressive boot on your head. It is quite strange that the people who scream anti-fascist the most also seem to subscribe to those same ideals when it suits their fancy.
Yeah, they're the same
But
sort of consumer celebrity class that everyone despises. The
I'm
people who
going
pretend that
to
they would be part of the working class and they're not.
I put a filter on my social media profile showing I support war in a certain country as I sip on my coffee that was made by indentured servants but is labeled fair trade, as I swipe on my phone, which is made by people who are jumping out of factory windows onto a net that has been erected around the skyscraper to catch people doing that very thing. And now in that country, which is China, the people are being beaten at Foxconn, which is one of the major factories. It's possibly the only factory in China that makes iPhones, but that is something that's very interesting. It's going to be probably fairly bad PR for Apple, but hasn't stopped people in the past, hasn't stopped people from putting that little sticker on the back windshield of their car and being proud that they support other indentured servants across the world. So I'm not saying like that is like, I don't necessarily have the solution to that, but we can definitely stop that. We
Well, we
can
could at
stop
least
doing
call
those
out the
actions.
hypocrisy. Yeah, we could at least call out the hypocrisy of these people trying to like. That's why, like, I don't understand the Trump or the Musk. I have to change it now. It's Trump derangement syndrome originally, and now it's Musk derangement syndrome involving Twitter, where it's like I don't know why everyone thinks that he's the worst billionaire in the world when there's obviously been worse. Like no one is talking about um the exploits of Bezos or Gates. Like especially involving public conversation. Like Gates paying off so many different news networks, or Bezos owning the Washington Post, which magically doesn't talk about anything negative involving Amazon and the fact that its workers have to wear diapers.
Oof.
Like this is what I mean, where they play this game because they are dishonest players, and I think we would be good to just sort of recognize for what they are, and we don't have to like they are dishonest players, so why would we even try to communicate with them? The goal is to actually like get rid of them, and the best way you can do that is to shun them. Because if as soon as you tell, it's like when you tell a child that I'm not going to play with you anymore because you're not playing good, then that child has to realize that, oh, what I'm doing is wrong, and then they change their behavior, hopefully for the better. That's what I feel like you have to do, unfortunately, in this situation, which is all of these, PSL sipping, Apple using hypocrites. These are the people that we more or less have to just stop dealing with in general. They're not good people. They're never going to be good people. They know the game they're playing. I know the game they're playing, and I don't want to play with them. I think it's as simple as that.
I think that was it.